All right, and for our final song for the evening, we'll turn to hymn number 535. 535, this is a shorter one, so we'll sing all three verses, and I hope that you think about, as we were having a missionary here this evening, we just gets us thinking about missions and evangelism and just our part of that. And we all have a part to play in that, and so I hope you're taking advantage of the opportunities that you have, and I hope that I'll take advantage of the opportunities I have. Let's sing all three verses and really think this is a prayer to God, and it's a hope for our hearts as well. Great singing this evening.
Good, thank you. And a good song to go into our missionary presentation with. You met Warren Vergils this morning for our Sunday school hour. He spoke for us and then just briefly during the service this morning. And I'm anxious for you to hear his testimony as well because one of the things I like is that they're both very familiar with the culture and the language there in Brazil. And so they have a head start on a lot of people in that. And I'm anxious for you to hear a little bit about the ministry that they have planned. So we have the kids that are going to the missionary presentation. Yours is more of a PowerPoint. So I think we're going to go ahead and send the kids out at this point and not have to do it a little bit later. So if you're going to the kids program this evening, you can go ahead and make your way out. And Lauren and Laura.
All right, thank you, Pastor. All right, good evening. All right, get some of these. There we go. All right, so this evening what we're going to do is we're going to start with our testimonies, and then a little later we're going to show you a little bit about the Brazilian culture, especially the Brazilian religious culture, and how certain things are changing in Brazil and how it's affecting church planning. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for a time of question and answer. So as we go through this, maybe you can be thinking about maybe different things about Brazil or about Brazilian culture or about politics or food or whatever you want to know, or even different things about our ministry presentation. Maybe something that we haven't made clear, just whatever you guys would like to know. We're going to open it up a little bit. We really enjoy this time of interaction, and so I hope you guys will be thinking about those things during the presentation. So Lada's going to come now and start with her testimony.
So I was born and grew up in Brazil, in the state of São Paulo. And when I was just a few months old, my parents, who were Roman Catholic, they were going through a difficult time in their lives, and my mom was struggling with serious depression. So she started searching for answers in different religions. She went to Pentecostal churches, Spiritism, Prosperity Gospel churches. And one night she went to a Baptist church, and an American missionary led her to Christ. And about a week later, my dad and older sister also accepted Christ. So I had the privilege to grow up in a Christian family. And when I was about 4 years old, I understood that I was a sinner. And because of that, I was separated from God forever. And that really scared me. So I went to my mom and I asked her, what should I do to be saved? She clearly explained the gospel to me, and I accepted Christ as my Savior. And growing up, our church was really small, like 20 people. So my family and I, we were involved in almost everything. We helped cleaning the church, kids ministry, music, everything that was needed. And when I finished high school, I decided to go to a Bible college in Brazil to study just for 1 year to learn how to help better my church. But when I was there, I learned so much that I decided to do the whole bachelor's program. I stayed there for 4 years, and God really used that time to work in my heart. And through missions conference and working at the churches, I understood that it was my responsibility to share the gospel, to spread the gospel. And I really wanted to work with Brazilian people because it's so sad to see all the idolatry that they are so involved in and the lack of true gospel. So I prayed that God would use me in His work. And in my last year of Bible college, I started talking with Warren, and we had the same desire to serve the Lord in Brazil. So after I graduated, we started dating, and 1 year after we got married. And now we are really excited to do the deputation and raise support to go back to Brazil and continue the work that God has called us to do.
All right, before I tell you my testimony, I want to show you a throwback. So this is one of my parents' first prayer cards. So does this look at all familiar, Pastor? All right. So, prayer cards have changed a little bit in the past 20 years or so. They don't dress missionary kids up in sailor outfits anymore. But that was, all the rage in the 90s, so it was great. So I think I still have those knickers somewhere. I don't know. But it was, so I grew up on the mission field in Brazil. And when I was 4 years old, actually, my parents moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and moved down to São Paulo, Brazil. And it was actually shortly before that, about 3 weeks or so before that, I remember I was playing with my brothers and sisters and thinking about things I had heard in Sunday school and at church, and understanding really for the first time that I was a sinner, and because of things that I had done, I deserved to be separated from God forever. So it was obviously a very scary thought, and so I went to my dad and asked my dad how I could go to heaven. And he took his Bible and showed me how Christ came and died on the cross for my sins, and that day I accepted Christ as my Savior. And shortly after that, my family moved down to São Paulo, Brazil, to the metro area, the city of São Paulo. So São Paulo is a really big city. There's about 24 million people in the metro area of the city of São Paulo, so really, really large city. And that's where my parents first started to work with a ministry team. And it was neat to see, even at a young age, to see people's lives transformed in a very visible way through the power of the gospel. And I remember seeing this fairly frequently, where engaging with people and seeing where people were coming from, hearing their life stories and understanding just how God was changing them and how they would come to Christ and how God would completely change the way they lived. And that really had an impact on me from a young age. And I remember when I was at a missions conference when I was 9 years old, I understood the need for the gospel to go into all the world, and I surrendered to serve the Lord as a missionary, as a 9-year-old. When kids make decisions like this, sometimes you have a tendency to question those decisions, and there are reasons for that. But I think a lot of times God is really working in kids' hearts and lives when they make decisions like this. And it was definitely true in my life. And so to prepare for ministry, I attended Bob Jones University. Actually, the year before I went to Bob Jones, I went to Bob Jones Academy. So I'll give a little bit of background to that. So where I grew up in Brazil, the kids there had this philosophy where, you don't try super hard in school, just enjoy life, C's are good enough, it's good enough just to pass. And I completely enveloped this life philosophy, much to the chagrin of my very academic parents. So they were like, what are we going to do with this kid? And so they sent me off to Bob Jones Academy. And I really learned how to study, and it was a great year. And they kind of whipped me up into shape a little bit and got me ready for the university. So next year I went to Bob Jones University. I was a missions major. And a lot of missionary kids, this is one of the problems with missionary kids, all right? Missionary kids think they know more about missions than they actually do. That's just the way it is, okay? Missionary kids, I've seen this done. I know what my parents do. I don't need to study that. But actually, studying missions from the perspective of a missionary kid is very, very helpful. And I was really forced to dig into the scriptures and to develop a biblical philosophy of missions. And this was great because it helped me do things, not just because my parents have done it, or my grandparents did it that way in Brazil, but really because this is the most biblical philosophy that I can come up with. And so it was a really important time of growth in my life. After my time at the university, I traveled for 6 months with Jim Van Gelderen and the Minuteman Evangelistic Team. And we went to different churches and used the Christian schools to kind of launch out into the public schools and to hold kind of like a VBS for teens. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great 6 months, and we saw many decisions for Christ. After that, I was getting ready to go back to Brazil to do a 2-year short-term missions trip under Baptist Mid Missions. And it was actually at this time that me and Lotta first started to communicate. And it was through the missionaries that started the church where Lotta's parents attend. They kind of suggested that we get together. You know, some of us need all the help we can get. So I was actually here in the States at the time. Lotta was in Brazil, and we started to communicate over Skype once a week. And we did this for about 9 months until I finally got to Brazil. And when I got to Brazil, a few months later we started dating, and then a year later we were married. But when I was in Brazil, I was involved in 2 different ministries. The first ministry was a church revitalization ministry. There was a church about 3 hours south of where we were living at the time. And they had gone through a very serious split, and they lost their pastor. They reached out to a Brazilian church planner in the area, and they asked this Brazilian church planner to come and help them. This Brazilian church planner was really busy with his own ministry, but he really wanted to do what he could for this church. And so he reached out to me and said, "Warren, why don't we tag team? And I'll go fill the pulpit one week, and then you go and fill the pulpit the next week, and we'll keep this church going, and then get it to the point where it's able to call another pastor and get it back on its feet." And so that's what we did for basically the first year I was in Brazil. Every other week I'd go down there for several days and do whatever was needed at the church. Do preaching, evangelism, visitation, whatever was needed. And it was really neat to see God take this church and take this situation that was actually very difficult and really turn it around for His glory. It was neat to see the church again reach out into the community and see souls saved, and the church members were then discipling those individuals. They were able to call a Brazilian pastor, and last semester they sent one of their young people to seminary, which is something that hadn't happened in that church for a long time. So it was just exciting to see how God was working in that ministry. The second ministry that we were involved with after we were married, we helped my parents start the church in the town of Presidente Prudente. Does that sound like a mouthful? It's really not too bad. It's President Prudent, and you put E's at the end. Okay, Presidente Prudente, and that's the town where my parents are working right now. And so that's this picture that you see. We started off by going door to door, and in Brazil it's a little different. It's a little different context. In Brazil, a lot of people in the cool of the day, they'll get chairs and they'll sit in front of their house because it's a really hot climate, and they'll kind of talk to their neighbors as they walk by in the street. And so we took advantage of this time. We just walk around and engage people in gospel conversation. And here in the States, when you go door to door, maybe you get a conversation of like 3 to 5 minutes if you're lucky, right? If anyone comes to the door. But there we were often having conversations of 20, 30, even 45 minutes with people, and being able just to really go through a clear presentation of the gospel. We started a small group Bible study in this rented facility. It's this little warehouse. And we kind of cleaned it up, got some chairs, and started small group Bible studies. And through those small group Bible studies, we were able to start regular services. We saw a couple individuals come to Christ, and there was a family that came from a different part of Brazil, and they were already believers, and they were looking for a good church. And so they quickly joined with us, and we began the ministry there. And so my parents are still there in that ministry. Right now there's about 4 key families in that church, in that ministry, and we're excited to go back and help my parents with this ministry and continue that work. So that's how the Lord has led in our lives. He brought us to the States last year in July. We went to candidate seminar at Baptist Mid Missions, and then we started deputation in about September of last year. We started traveling full time. So the Lord is blessed, and So we're going to transition now and talk a little bit about the religious culture. So I'm going to show you this map. A lot of people come to us and say, isn't Brazil a big country? Isn't it about the size of Texas? Well, Brazil is actually larger than the continental United States. Brazil is a really big place, and it has over 200 million people within its borders. It's a beautiful, diverse country. It's a wonderful culture. And Lada's going to come and explain a little bit about what the religious culture is like within Brazil.
So in Brazil, every city, no matter how big or small, in every part of the country has a big Catholic church. And it's normally right in the middle of the city in front of the town square. The cities were built around the church. And if you walk around the streets of a Brazilian city, you can easily find small rented buildings with Pentecostal church names on the front. And these churches, they have a tendency to pop up, stay a little while, and then go somewhere else. And they base their salvation in several things, like baptism, church attendance, speaking tongues. And this caused great confusion, and the idea of salvation by grace alone is difficult for them to understand. And the Pentecostalism feeds off the emotionalism of the Brazilian culture, with several religious experiences. And another church that has gained popularity in recent years is the Igreja Universal, Universal Church, which is a prosperity gospel church. They ask for large offerings from those who attend in exchange for worldly blessings and wealth. And in 2014, they made a church that is supposed to look like Solomon's temple in the city of São Paulo. And they spent over 680 million reais in this building, which is about $300 million. And every month they receive about 400,000 visitors. And what is said is the sincerity in which these people follow these religions.
So I'm going to show you a chart and just show you a little bit how Brazil has changed in the past 30 to 40 years. At the beginning of this chart, it starts from 1970 and it goes to 2010, the last time the census was done in Brazil. And you can see that orange part at the bottom of the chart shows the amount of the cult of the population that's Roman Catholic. So that orangish section in the bottom. You can see at the beginning of the chart in 1970 that orange section is almost covering the whole part of Brazil, the population. Brazil is one of the largest Roman Catholic countries in the world. And is very prevalent, and the Roman Catholic Church had a lot of influence over the cultures, and specifically over individual towns and locations. This has actually kind of changed in the past 30 to 40 years. You see this kind of maroonish section, the Protestant section, kind of grow, and it's actually grown quite a lot in comparison to the population growth of the country. And this is something that we can look at and think that's really good, right? It's very positive. But if you really dig into these numbers, you'll see what's really going on with these churches. This graph here shows the list of different kinds of Protestant groups. This first one, the smallest one, is historical Protestants. And you see their growth in the past 30 to 40 years is very, very slight in comparison to the population growth of the country. So historical Protestants would be churches like Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists. These denominations would be historical Protestants. The groups that have really exploded in Brazil over the past 30 to 40 years is this middle group, Pentecostalism. And as Lada mentioned, Pentecostalism feeds off the emotionalism of the Brazilian people, and it offers a very engaging worship experience focused on speaking in tongues and healings. The difficulty with Pentecostalism is a lot of people base their salvation or their relationship with God based on these religious experiences. And so oftentimes we encounter people and they tell us something similar to this. They say, one time I had a really bad stomach ache and I went to church and the pastor prayed and my stomach ache went away. So God clearly views me favorably. I'm clearly saved, right? And we kind of hear this all the time in different variations. And there's actually a lot of stories about these radical things happening to people, these very radical healings and things that happen to people. And people often rely heavily on these experiences to understand their relationship with God. This other group, unclassified Protestants, that have become even more prevalent than all the historical Protestants combined, would be the health and wealth prosperity gospel churches. And these churches, like the Igreja Universal, which Lada mentioned, offers physical and material blessings for financial gifts to the church. And I'll just give you a quick story so you can understand a little bit about how these churches function. When we first moved down to Brazil, my parents met this one lady who attended one of these churches. And through activities that her son got involved in, he ended up in jail. And this lady went to her pastor and asked her pastor to pray that her son be released from jail. Her pastor said he'd love to pray for this, but normally a request like this was accompanied by some sort of gift to the church. So the lady went to her house and got 100 reais, which is about $30, which at that time in Brazil was a good amount of money for a woman of her social class. And she took it to her pastor. And her pastor said, well, it's not quite enough. And so she got on the phone and she got one of her relatives to sell their car so she could give the money to the church so the pastor can pray that her son would be released from jail. So you kind of see how this works, how this mentality. And these things sound awful, sound terrible to us, but actually this is an extension of the Roman Catholic culture. And the idea of exchanging something to receive the grace of God is a very logical thing for people from a Roman Catholic background. So that's why these health and wealth prosperity churches have done so well in Brazil, because of the Roman Catholic background that it feeds off of. And this is the way Brazil is today. And you talk to a lot of people and you hear stories like this, where they came from a Roman Catholic background, maybe they converted to evangelicalism, which means anything that's not Catholic, and they maybe went to a Pentecostal church. Maybe they got burned out, after all the hype, after a while, and they went to a health, wealth, prosperity gospel church. And either them or their family members were involved in one of these schemes from these churches, and they just kind of get burned out from formal religion. So we encounter a lot of people who are kind of hardened to any sense of formal religion, but unlike here in the States, where people turn to atheism and agnosticism, people in Brazil tend to seek God their own way. They're very inherently religious, and a relationship with God to them is very important, even if they do seek God in their own way. One of the difficulties, though, is people will assimilate different theological points from different churches they attend. And so one of the difficulties as we give people the gospel is for them really to articulate and to understand what are they placing their faith and trust in for salvation. It is some sort of sense where they assimilate all these different things in their mind. And they trust in even many different things. Their baptism as a baby, maybe their baptism as a convert later to evangelicalism, maybe some religious experience they've had or giving money to the church. All these things contribute to their ideas of even good works, which is also an extension of their Roman Catholic background. In Brazil right now, there is a lot of confusion because of all these different religions and all these different theological points. And our hope and our prayer in Brazil is to penetrate all this religious confusion by sharing the true gospel of Jesus Christ. And it's exciting to see, as people are confronted by the truth of the gospel, the simplicity that Jesus saves. There's nothing that we can do to merit God's favor. As people understand this message, the Holy Spirit opens people's eyes, and it's exciting to see people turn to Christ. Our hope and our prayer in Brazil is to be able to go back to Brazil and to establish Brazilian churches. Our hope is to go and to make disciples, to join them into local assemblies. And then our goal for these churches is that they will be able to reproduce. They will be able to go and to reach their own people. In Brazil is very urban. It's very urban in its context, and reaching different neighborhoods and different cities is very, very important. So having churches a little closer together than maybe we would be comfortable with here in the States would not necessarily be a bad thing. And so having churches reproduce even in their own city would be very, very important. Also, our hope and our prayer in Brazil is also to see churches not only plant Brazilian churches within Brazil, but tend to reach out and participate in global missions. And this is something that's happening in Brazil. Brazilian churches that have been there a while are starting to get a vision for the need for the gospel to go into all the world. And there are several Brazilian missionaries that are being sent out by churches. And it's really exciting to see. One of the problems is, though, however, is that there is not a lot of good missions books or missions information for these people. There's not a lot of good even missions training in this. And so one of the ways we hope to help this is currently I'm studying intercultural studies through Bob Jones Seminary, and we hope to take this information and be able to communicate it better to Brazilian churches and Brazilian seminaries, and to further equip Brazilian missionaries to go into all the world. So this is our goal and our prayer. We hope to plant Brazilian churches that can reproduce locally and globally. So I just ask you to consider a few things this evening. Right now, we are on deputation and we're looking for ministry partners. And you can partner with us in ministry in two ways. The first way is through your prayer support. You can sign up for our email updates in the back in our display, take a prayer card, and we send an update out at least once a month to keep you current on what's going on in our ministry. And that way you can be praying for us. And that's a very important part of your ministry to missionaries, interceding on their behalf for the throne of grace. Also, we need financial support. We need to be at 100% of our support before Baptist Missions gives us the green light to head back to Brazil. And at this point, the Lord's really blessed. He's brought us to 63%, which we're very thankful for. God's brought many ministry partners our way. But I just ask you to consider what part the Lord would have you play in this aspect of our ministry. Also, I'd ask you to pray for the country of Brazil. We believe that God is doing wonderful things in the country of Brazil, and it's really exciting to see, especially this aspect of missions and Brazilians sending missionaries to other parts of the world. It's really exciting to see. I just ask you to pray that God would continue to open people's eyes, that God would continue to penetrate all this religious confusion, and the gospel would be clearly proclaimed in the country of Brazil. And pray that Brazilian churches will continue to reproduce themselves and to send missionaries around the world. So this is our ministry presentation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up to questions. So does anyone have any questions about Brazilian culture, different things? Anything? Yes?
So you guys are going to plant your own church, or are you going to be working alongside your parents?
Yes, that's a good question. So our immediate plans are to go back to Brazil and work with my parents. And we're going to be working with them for at least the first 2 years of our first 4-year term. Baptist Missions stipulates that new missionaries have to work their first term under veteran leadership. And it's a really important thing. And so we're going to work the first 2 years with my parents, and then possibly working with another missionary couple, another veteran missionary couple in a different part of Brazil. And this would be even for our own growth and development, and also for us even getting a vision for what God is doing in different parts of Brazil. So that's a great question. Yes. Long term, our plans are to establish a ministry team with several missionaries or even Brazilian couples. And we hope to start this church planning team. We would love to see at least three couples of us all together in a ministry team, and then continue the work of church planning. So that would be more long term. So that's a great question, sir. Anybody else? Any other question? Yes, sir.
What part of Brazil are you working in, and what parts are available and not available?
Right. So Brazil, in the part of Brazil where we're working at, is the interior of the state of São Paulo. So São Paulo is the big city where there's 24 million people, but it's also a state. It's like New York, New York. So we're on the opposite side of the state of São Paulo, the opposite side from the big city. So we're about 7 hours away from the big city. And actually in that part of Brazil, in the interior as we call it, away from the coast, there's really not a lot of good gospel preaching churches in that area of Brazil. Most mission work have focused on the big cities along the coast, and for good reason. There's huge needs in the big cities. But there's a lot of needs in that interior part of the state of São Paulo. I'll just give you just quick understanding of how scattered our churches are in the interior of the state of São Paulo. So my parents their previous work was in a town called Osvaldo Cruz, an hour away of where they're working now in Presidente Prudente. And in that previous work where they were at, the closest church to them of like faith and practice would have been probably Lada's church up in Rio Preto, which is about 3.5 hours away. And the closest church to the south was about 3.5 hours in the next state. And so you just see there's a lot of area where there really is a huge need for good churches. And so we're going to focus in there when we first go back to Brazil, and just pray and just see where it goes from there. We'll probably focus in the southern central part of Brazil with our ministry. So that's a good question. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes.
Are there any secondary issues like drugs and that kind of thing that you guys see and will have to face?
Yes. There's a lot of maybe similar things to what you would experience here in the States. There is a big drug problem. This tends to be even more pronounced in big cities like São Paulo and Rio. In Rio, there are certain parts of the city that are basically controlled by drug lords and different things like that, where you don't see that as much where we live, but you do see drug activity. Also, in Brazil, it is an emerging market, and so you see the bigger contrast between the rich and the masses, we'll put it that way, the way the normal people live and the way the upper class people live. So you see those contrasts in a way where you wouldn't see necessarily here in the States. And so you have really nice shopping malls and very modern facilities, and then close by there are people living in very, very simple housing and different things like that. In Brazil, what divides people more is not necessarily racial lines, which has been the tendency here in the United States of America. It has been the class structure. And so in the previous city where we lived, people would often ask what neighborhood we lived in. And that would indicate whether we could, be friends or communicate or stuff like that. So things that you probably wouldn't see here in the States.
And then also, do they, coming out of the multiple different religious backgrounds that they have, do you find a battle for the home and family and marriage and that kind of thing as well? Or are they pretty biblically based on it because they come out of?
Right. That's a really good point. And actually, there are certain aspects of Brazilian culture that we would maybe view as more traditional because of the Roman Catholic background. Roman Catholicism and religious groups in Brazil have maybe more influence than they would have here in the States. And so because of that, you wouldn't see so much divorce like you would here in the States. I can think of one or two couples I know in Brazil that are divorced. And it's just not very common. It's not very common. But they would be more traditional in that sense where even I think in their view of like abortion and different things like that, they would be more aligned with Scripture, which is a great thing. So there are different positives and negatives in the culture. The culture is not as secular as it is here in the United States, which is in a sense a blessing. It is. So that's a great question. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes?
Politically, what's the feeling there towards missionaries, religion? Are they very
Okay, yeah. So politically, we don't have a lot of oppression from government. The Brazilian government is pretty open to various religions. The way that maybe we would face different things, different pressures, other than what you would experience here in the States, would be maybe towns that are smaller, and smaller towns tend to be more dominated by the Catholic Church. So in the previous church plant my parents were at, they had a really vibrant children's ministry. Almost right away, there was like 50 or 60 kids coming, and it was almost more than my parents and the people they were working with could handle at the time. And then it was several months later, all of a sudden, the kids stopped coming. There was like 2 or 3 kids. And we found out that the priest had gone to all the public schools and told the kids not to come to our church. And the priest had also gone to each home in our neighborhood and told the parents not to send their kids to our church. And because there's respect for the Catholic Church and respect for the priest, they obeyed that. So you probably wouldn't see that here in the States as much. In the city we're living now, it's a larger city. It's a city of about 240,000. And in larger cities, the Roman Catholic Church has less of a hold of people's lives, and there's more, in a sense, freedom in that way. But actually, politically in Brazil right now, Brazil has gone through quite a shift politically. I don't know if you've kept up with anything that's gone on in Brazil. The previous administration that was in charge in Brazil was basically in office since 2000. And it was very left-leaning. It was very socialistic in its tendencies. And Brazil kind of really embraced it. And And through actually some activities that they got involved in, they were involved in one of the biggest money laundering scandals in political history. And it was through the government-owned petroleum business. And all these things came out about this administration, and Brazilians kind of got fed up with this. So they kind of swung the other way in the last election about a year and a half ago. And they elected a guy who's very outspoken, a guy who's very kind of rambunctious, and he has a very active Twitter account. So I don't know if that reminds you of anybody. So his name is Bolsonaro, and they call him the Trump of the tropics. So him and Trump get along pretty good together. He's actually doing some things that to Brazilians are very, very extreme. He's trying to legalize weapons in Brazil for individuals to own firearms, which for Brazilians is very, very strange. They just can't understand that it's not necessarily part of their culture like it would be for us here in the States. But it's interesting, that shift that Brazil has gone through. And they're going through a lot of things politically that we're facing here in the States because of the immigration crisis in Venezuela. You know, Venezuela is really struggling. And a lot of people are coming to Brazil and taking Brazilian jobs and stuff. And so it's interesting. They're facing a lot of similar things that we're facing here in the States. So it's an interesting time in Brazil right now, politically. That's a great question. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you play soccer?
I do. Yes, sir. Soccer is a big deal in Brazil. Yes. What was that? Actually, volleyball is really big in Brazil as well. It's really big. So we play a lot of beach volleyball. You see these sand volleyball pits all over the place. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah. But soccer's definitely, the premier sport. It's what it's all about. So good question. Anybody else? Yes.
Are your siblings in Brazil, or they?
I have my youngest sister is in Brazil right now. She's taken a year off college, and she's just working with my parents right now. But the rest of my siblings are here in the States doing different things. So, yes, sir.
You raise a family, what kind of schooling needs are you going to need?
That's an interesting question. When I was growing up in Brazil, missionary kids were mostly homeschooled, and I was homeschooled. There are some missionaries who put their kids now in private schools or public schools. It really depends on the situation, in the context where the missionary finds themselves. So that's something we'll probably have to figure out in the next few years. So yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes?
What age do children start working in Brazil?
So Brazilian kids maybe would work, it might be similar times to where they would work here in the States. Maybe I think 16 is the age where they're allowed to work. Yeah, 16. So you see that. It depends on what part of the city you are, but in a lot of cities, when kids turn 16, they're sometimes expected to get jobs and help support the family. So you see that more than you would here in the States, where kids here normally get jobs to pay for college or different things like that. So you see that at a younger age. There's more responsibility in the household. It's a good question. All right. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for having us here. We really enjoyed getting to know many of you today. I just ask you to please go and check out our display in the back. Please take a prayer card, sign up for our email updates, and just thank you so much for welcoming us in here today. So I'll turn it over to Pastor.
And as always, we encourage you to sign up for the emails and get the prayer card and just be well aware of what their ministry is and get to know them as well. And so I'm going to let them go ahead and make their way to the foyer. Now, they are traveling tonight. He has to be back in South Carolina for a class tomorrow, so he's going to be around here for a little bit, but not for a long time. He won't be playing volleyball tonight with the group. So take the time to talk to them. And then we have a fellowship downstairs, and so we'd love for you to stay for that and just enjoy some time together. Kara is here, and I understand tomorrow is your birthday. Is that correct? Happy birthday. All right. Let's go ahead and stand, and we'll pray and then be dismissed. Father in heaven, we're thankful that we have the privilege of knowing the Lord Jesus Christ, and we have the privilege of being. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm hoping that this video will be worth 1,000 words on this webpage. Hi, I'm Pastor Wright from Keystone Baptist Church. Thank you for taking the time to visit our website today. Unfortunately, words on a page can only do so much to give you a feel for a church. There's no substitute for actually visiting. You probably already know that. But sometimes walking into a strange place with people you don't know is a little intimidating. That's why we've created this video. I want to give you a visual tour of what to expect when you're our guest here at church. When you arrive at the church, you can park in either the front or the back parking lot, but you'll probably end up parking in the back parking lot because there are more spaces here. From that parking lot, look for the wide sidewalk that'll lead you into the west wing. The west wing doors will take you into a hallway that'll take you to the foyer, and in that foyer is an information desk. There'll be somebody at that information desk that can help you get your children to Sunday school, the nursery, or wherever else you need. Don't forget, anytime during the process of coming in, our church family will be happy to help you. Just ask somebody. They'll point you in the right direction. Families are always concerned about the care for their children. When you arrive here at the information desk, one of our church members will either be behind this desk or right outside the desk. They'll help you get to the right place. On Wednesday night, we have our Patch Club, Keystone Kids, and Royalty Club. Those young people will go to the different areas, and then the adults will be here in the auditorium for the Bible study. Now, for those of you who have young children, our nursery is down the hallway on the east wing. As you go down that hallway, you'll find that there are two doors. If you go to the last door, there's a procedure for picking up and dropping off your child. When you pick up and drop off your child, our nursery workers will give you some information, and they'll answer your questions for you. Those workers rotate from service to service under the direction of Mrs. Skidmore. Now, I know, because I'm the father of 3 children, that the last thing you want to hear is your child crying when you leave. But that's a normal thing. When you leave the nursery, you'll be given one of these. It is a parent pass, and it's a pager. If our staff cannot get your child settled down, or if they need you during the service for any reason, they can page you anywhere in our building. Rest assured, making your children feel comfortable is one of our highest priorities. Our Sunday morning service begins at 10 o'clock with traditional hymns, Bible reading, prayer, and then a Bible-based message. When I get up to begin the message, I will dismiss those who are 3 years old through the 3rd grade to go to our junior church program. They'll go out the auditorium and into the foyer. Our workers will meet them there and take them to their They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm hoping that this video will be worth 1,000 words on this webpage. Hi, I'm Pastor Wright from Keystone Baptist Church. Thank you for taking the time to visit our website today. Unfortunately, words on a page can only do so much to give you a feel for a church. There's no substitute for actually visiting. You probably already know that. But sometimes walking into a strange place with people you don't know is a little intimidating. That's why we've created this video. I want to give you a visual tour of what to expect when you're our guest here at church. When you arrive at the church, you can park in either the front or the back parking lot, but you'll probably end up parking in the back parking lot because there are more spaces here. From that parking lot, look for the wide sidewalk that'll lead you into the west wing. The west wing doors will take you into a hallway that'll take you to the foyer, and in that foyer is an information desk. There'll be somebody at that information desk that can help you get your children to Sunday school, the nursery, or wherever else you need. Don't forget, anytime during the process of coming in, our church family will be happy to help you. Just ask somebody. They'll point you in the right direction. Families are always concerned about the care for their children. When you arrive here at the information desk, one of our church members will either be behind this desk or right outside the desk. They'll help you get to the right place. On Wednesday night, we have our Patch Club, Keystone Kids, and Royalty Club. Those young people will go to the different areas, and then the adults will be here in the auditorium for the Bible study. Now, for those of you who have young children, our nursery is down the hallway on the east wing. As you go down that hallway, you'll find that there are two doors. If you go to the last door, there's a procedure for picking up and dropping off your child. When you pick up and drop off your child, our nursery workers will give you some information and they'll answer your questions for you. Those workers rotate from service to service under the direction of Mrs. Skidmore. Now, I know, because I'm the father of 3 children, that the last thing you want to hear is your child crying when you leave. But that's a normal thing. When you leave the nursery, you'll be given one of these. It is a parent pass, and it's a pager. If our staff cannot get your child settled down, or if they need you during the service for any reason, they can page you anywhere in our building. Rest assured, making your children feel comfortable is one of our highest priorities. Our Sunday morning service begins at 10 o'clock with traditional hymns, Bible reading, prayer, and then a Bible-based message. When I get up to begin the message, I will dismiss those who are 3 years old through the 3rd grade to go to our junior church program. They'll go out the auditorium and into the foyer. Our workers will meet them there and take them to their classrooms. The service begins at 10 o'clock, and it'll go to between 11:15 and 11:30. When the service is over, the junior church workers will bring the young people back up and bring them directly to you. The same thing is true for Sunday night, except Sunday nights there is no junior church, and our young people sit in the church service with their families. There's a lot more that I would like to show you, but we're about out of time. We'll put some more clips at the end of this video if you have time to watch them. But you've seen the basic layout of our church and the services. I'll be happy to give you a longer tour in person. Thanks again for visiting our website. I look forward to visiting with you in person.
Hi, my name is Tim. I'm a pastor of preaching here at Grace Baptist Church, and I just want to invite you to join us some Sunday. I know you'll find a warm group, a family of Christians that will embrace you and help you to grow in your Christian faith. We're actually right in the middle of Queens, Forest Hills, and just like Queens, our church is very diverse as well. People from all over the world, many different ethnicities, languages, food, and even situations, life, ages, all kind of mixed together to form a healthy, vibrant body. And we wanted you to join with us. It's interesting how the church is kind of like made up of all these different jewels, right? We all have these different backgrounds that we bring to the table, and the Lord is shaping us, fashioning us to what He wants us to be. And He wants to shape you as well. He may use a chisel. He may use pressure, and sometimes that doesn't feel so good. But it's all to make you more like Jesus. And when we meet on Sunday, it's like He's bringing us all together, shaping us, fashioning us into a diadem or a crown to fit on the head of the church, the King of Kings, Jesus. And so when we meet together, we need you to join too, to be a sparkling jewel in that crown, to worship the Lord. So please come and take part. You may say, well, what is Grace Baptist Church like? Whenever somebody asks me that, I really try to say it's a Bible-driven church or a Bible-based church. What does that mean? Well, if you were to ask one person what they would want in a church or another person what they would want in a church, you'd probably get two different